From the very beginning, I thought this was a very bad idea, but I had to try something. Anything. Even if I was convinced I was wasting my time and everyone else's before I even got there. Bill Gillard, my boss, heard about the job opening and insisted that I apply for the job. Bill knew, as did I, that I would need far more money in my bank accounts than he could ever pay me if I was going to have any chance of winning the custody case. Hell, I needed a lot more money than I had just to pay all these legal hangers-on. Not to mention paying a nanny or someone to watch the kids during the day while I'm at work if, by some miracle, I emerge victorious in court. Interviews have never been my thing at the best of times. I doubt many other people like them either. I cleared the preliminary stages without much difficulty and was shortlisted. But this particular interview, where His Majesty Jack Goldberg himself will be in attendance, was one I wasn't really looking forward to. You see, Jack Goldberg and I had, well, a history of sorts. Well, that's not entirely true. The truth is that I had an affair for more than a few months with one Canella Goldberg, usually known to most people as Ella or Ellie, the daughter of an old fart during our teenage years. In fact, to be completely honest, it was a very intense connection, if you know what I mean. But I'm afraid I must say that my family did not very much approve of my courtship of a Jewish girl, even if she was a beauty who drove me around in a brand new car. Look, my parents weren't anti-Semitic, but they were definitely extremely class-conscious. My father had this thing with people he thought were born with a silver spoon in their mouth. And Carnella's family? Well, Ellie's parents also didn't really approve of her hanging out with someone they considered to be from the wrong side of town, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if they realized he was a Christian to boot, even if I didn't attend church every Sunday. Heck, the only times I've been in church since my own baptism that I can remember, were to attend someone's wedding, christening, funeral, and the like. Oh hell, yes, and your own wedding, of course. But let's not talk about that for now. Well, to be honest with everyone, I'm not at all sure that religion played any role in this matter as far as the Goldbergs were concerned. I believe that no matter who he was or what religion he professed, unless he went to private school, the Goldbergs would never have considered anyone a suitable candidate for future sons-in-law. Here was the problem. My old man believed that everyone who studied in the privileged private sector should be put up against a wall and shot, not literally, by the way, but you get the general feeling. And Ellie's family seemed to think that people educated in the public sector were inferior to them. Mind you, for some inexplicable reason, the old Triumph I rode along with the accompanying leather jacket, jeans, and boots evoked a very similar reaction from the Goldbergs, and from most of the parents of the girls I courted in those days. Of course, they never saw me in the business suit that I wore in the office while working. Perhaps that is why I wore leather clothes and even rode a motorcycle. I was young and wanted to look like a rebel, at least outwardly. Most of my friends were still in college and did not have an office dress code to adhere to while working. Ellie and I had a really good time together for a while. For quite a long time, in fact. Mind you, the guys made fun of me a lot. You know, the snide remarks about how I'm only dating Ellie Goldberg because she gave me rides in the brand new car her dad gave her for her birthday. Like many young people, I couldn't afford a car back then. Plus, even in the dead of winter, there are places to park and things you can do in a car that you can't do in the seat of an old Triumph Bonnie. Take my word for it. Yes, well, I guess I have to admit that this car may have had some influence in shaping our relationship. But the biggest attraction for a hormonal teenager, was that Ellie was. Well, Ellie was an incredible beauty by any human standards. But to be completely honest with you, in the beginning I probably started flirting with her mainly because there was a rumor among the guys that Ellie would never humiliate herself by hanging out with a guy. Being a bit of a guy in those days, who relied too much on his chances and also had a reputation for having the gift of eloquence, this rumor was like a red rag to a bull to me. I just needed to prove to the world that I was the man with the golden touch. Or more accurately, someone who can have any woman he wants. However, I quickly proved the rumor wrong once I decided to take the plunge. I also admit that when we started dating, I didn't take our relationship seriously. Hell, I was young and didn't take almost anything seriously in life back then. I somehow realized that maybe Ellie was only dating me to dispel rumors that she was some kind of snob. However, over time, I became attached to Ellie, and I was mistaken in believing that she had the same feelings for me. Despite the obvious disapproval of our families and the ridicule that I regularly received from the guys. You know, Ellie and I were together for almost 2 years before her father sent her. Good question, Ellie called it school, but I always thought it was some kind of university. Later I came to the conclusion that this must be one of those Swiss finishing schools you've heard about. You know, those places where debutantes went to study. Hell, I don't know what they learned there, probably how not to stoop to communicate with people like me, I guess. In my opinion, the Goldbergs have always had delusions of grandeur. Anyway, I wasn't much of a letter writer back then, and, well, although I was more than a little upset that Ellie had left, the old hormones were still kicking in, and there were plenty of other fish in the sea, if you know what I mean. I assumed that Ellie was too busy studying, so after the first impulse our letters became less and less frequent until they stopped altogether. I guess I eventually realized that Ellie just wanted to have fun hanging out with the common folk for a while. That's exactly what some girls said. Perhaps even get rid of wild oats. I was told that this behavior is not limited to the male sex of our species. Moreover, I very quickly discovered that I had not lost my touch, and I also developed an interesting reputation among the local girls. Well, there must have been some explanation for my success in female hunting. Okay, I may have been lucky in my younger days, but I never considered myself an Adonis or anything like that. I never found out in detail what the girls were saying about me behind my back. But let's just say it soon became clear that no matter what they said, it didn't do me any harm when it came to talking to any available girl who was around. Which didn't do me any good. So these are frank proposals from new friends of friends. Well, maybe I should say that they made it clear that they would be available if I paid attention to them. This didn't sit well with some of the other guys, and sometimes led to unfortunate encounters that often ended not only in the end of budding romances, but also my long friendships with the guys in question. No, if the girl made it clear, then who am I to refuse the lady? But none of this actually has anything to do with what I told you, I don't think. Much water has passed under the bridge since Ellie and I were together. Where have I been? You know, I have a nasty habit of going off on tangents, but this at least gives you a little background and may save you from having to explain later. Oh yeah, after Ellie left, I got into the habit of changing girlfriends quite often. Firstly, because I could, and secondly, because I had become quite attached to Ellie when we were together, and losing her was an unexpectedly painful experience for me. I wasn't going to fall into that emotional trap again if I could help it. I don't know if it was 3 or 4 years before I started dating Gloria. I don't remember very well where we met. At a party or something, I guess. She was, and remains, a remarkably beautiful woman and still has a magnificent figure, considering that she gave birth to 2 children. This figure probably had a significant influence on how our relationship initially began. Can I do anything about it if I'm obsessed with a pretty face and a slim figure? Hell, most hormonal young people are like this, but I'll tell you, I can't even remember when and how we met, or under what circumstances did I first ask Gloria out, but obviously I did. Anyway, Gloria and I hit it off pretty quickly. I think it was on our 4th or 5th date that she stayed over for the first time. Gloria wasn't inexperienced, but neither was I. In those days, very few people in their early 20s were like that. Well, at least not where I'm from. The old Triumph was no longer around by then. It was replaced by my own four-wheeled car. If I remember correctly, the Ford has more mileage than many other cars. Yes, well, I already mentioned the disadvantages of two-wheelers. Plus, I couldn't ride a motorcycle to work in a business suit, and I felt like a real fool waiting for the bus every morning. I was offered a promotion and needed to take a little more care of my image. I think it's more commonly described as growing up. I guess it was 5 or 6 months before one of the guys noticed that Gloria had been around much longer than usual for my girlfriends after Ellie. Actually, I didn't notice it. I wasn't sure at the time whether this was good or bad, but it seemed that against my better judgment, I had somehow gotten used to Gloria being around. Was I in love with Gloria? Well, to be honest, I can't say. I assumed I was at the time, despite her more obvious flaws. You see, Gloria had the same megalomania as Ellie's family. But unfortunately, unlike Ellie, who in practice turned out to be completely different, Gloria was very expensive to maintain. Or, to put it simply, Gloria was one hell of a dear friend. She may have been very excited in bed, but she could spend money like it was going out of fashion. However, by the time I realized this serious flaw, I had become so accustomed to having Gloria around that I could not imagine my life without her. We had been dating for just over 2 years when I must have proposed to her. No, I can't remember the first time I asked Gloria to marry me, although I do remember a party sometime later when and where I formally gave her an engagement ring. But by then it was a done deal and was no surprise to anyone. We were married within a year of that party, and within months Pamela, our first child, was on the way. Unlike many of our young married friends, we didn't have money problems at first. Somewhat unexpectedly, given that I was not a particularly gifted student, I left school much earlier than most of my peers. Much to Mrs. Williams's dismay, mathematics was the only subject at school in which I showed talent. However, Mrs. Rogers Williams referred me to the accounting department of a local company to find a job, and I'm guessing they used some form of undue influence to get them to offer the job to the young tomboy. Look, no one would look at the teenager and think he could work in the accounting department except Mrs. Williams. I know all my friends and family made the strangest expressions when I told them about my new job. My interest in computers and programming may have helped, by the way, but I don't think it was really significant. In any case, I was lucky with this job. Bill Gillard, the company's accountant, and, as I learned much later, coincidentally, a very good friend of the patriarchal Mrs. Mary Williams, took a liking to me. After a very short period of time, he sent me to a full-time accounting course at a local technical college. In these courses, to my surprise, most of my classmates were much older than me. What's even more surprising is that soon some of them started asking me to be their study partner. My talent for math turned out to be greater than I ever realized. The result of my studies was that within a few years, I became number 2 in my employer's accounting department, working directly under and receiving mentoring and training from Bill Gillard. And I should add that I beat out many much older and more experienced employees. Surprisingly, few of them seemed offended to find themselves suddenly subordinate to a man barely out of adolescence. Maybe it's because I didn't get arrogant when one of them made a mistake, and usually I could fix the situation without making a fuss. In any case, the position I took up at such an early age meant that I was never particularly short of money in my early 20s. But on the other hand, my socialite lifestyle also meant that I could spend my money almost as quickly as I made it. This could be the reason why I didn't notice that Gloria was such a dear friend while we were dating. After Gloria gave birth to our second daughter, things really started to go wrong. I already told you that Gloria was expensive to keep and suffered from delusions of grandeur. Well, after Deborah came into the family, Gloria began to go beyond all limits. Although she was a housewife, Gloria wanted us to hire a nanny or governess to help look after the girls. I didn't think we could afford it, and Gloria called me a cheapskate who wanted her to work herself to the bone taking care of our children. For some time, there was a real war in the house. To be fair, Gloria had been complaining about being stuck at home all the time since Pamela was born, but I chalked it up to her being a new mother. It just didn't come to a head until our second daughter, Deborah, joined the family. Eventually, Gloria offered to return to work at least partly to pay for a nanny to help with the children. It seemed like a peaceful solution to me, and for a while after we went through the routine of applying for a nanny, lots of visits from official old dragons and forms being filled out, the house was at peace for a while. Inga, our young Swedish nanny, emphasis on the word beautiful, here came on the scene a few weeks later, and Gloria returned to doing several hours of work almost every day of every week at the company where she worked before Pamela was born. Both of our girls, even if Deborah was too young to notice, took an immediate liking to Inga, and she seemed to adore them. I never heard Inga complain as Gloria did about how much the children demanded. Some evenings Inga spent several hours in the children's room, quietly singing to the children so that they would fall asleep. I got along great with Inga. What man wouldn't get along? Inga was very pleasing to the eye, to put it mildly. The classic Swedish girl we're all used to seeing in films, and her presence in the family had a clear comic edge. And I'm not talking about how Inga distorted the English language here. In fact, her spoken English has improved exponentially after just a few weeks with us. Inga's presence on the street with us, or when we went to the supermarket as a family, caused most of the laughter. It was funny for me to watch how young men and very often grown men who should have known better ran into lamp posts and pushed carts into each other and so on because their eyes were on Ng and not on where they were coming. The type of entertainment you can get these days by watching these idiots texting on their cell phones while walking down the street. More seriously, one young man rode his bike into the back of a bus and another flipped over his skateboard headfirst on the stairs, proving you can't do skateboard tricks by looking at an attractive young Swedish girl. Ultimately and unfortunately, Inga's presence also had a serious side. Unfortunately, after 3 or 4 months, she decided to complain to me, not very subtly, by the way, but in a private conversation that on some days she had to look after the children much longer than stated in her contract, which, by the way, wasn't many more hours a day than Gloria had to work, although Inga always seemed happy to help with the children most evenings. Given her obvious affection for her children, her complaint might have been considered odd were it not for the fact that Inga also hinted again, not very subtly, that on those particular days Gloria would get in and out of a strange car on her way to and from work. It was pretty obvious that Inga's complaint was just a way of drawing my attention to what she thought I should know. The car didn't bother me at first because Gloria had previously informed me that she would sometimes ride in the car with another part-time employee and longtime friend. Like I said, Gloria went back to work at the same company she worked for before she was pregnant with Pamela and kept in touch with all her old friends who worked there. But then, Inga seemed to hint that Gloria's friend, with whom she was driving, sometimes had access to 2 different vehicles, and in addition, usually on those days, when Gloria returned home from work very late, the car friend somehow changed gender. Inga was very nice, actually. She later explained to me in a lot more words, and beating around the bush a few times in the process, that her mother cheated on her father when she was a little girl. As a result, Inga felt obliged to tell me that she suspected Gloria was doing the same thing. On the relevant days when Inga let me know, I took several days off and quickly became convinced that my Gloria was having an illicit relationship with one of the managers in her office. Soon after I became convinced of this fact, an unexpected turn took place when I confronted my wife about her affair. Gloria wasn't at all stunned when I told her I knew what was going on. In fact, she might have been surprised, but Gloria just didn't seem to care. She simply repeated again that I was a cheapskate and added that I was also boring. Or words of the same effect, if not to put it more crudely. Gloria then informed me that she would soon be moving in with her much more generous boyfriend as soon as she could arrange it. Moreover, she said that she would take the children and Inga with her. Gloria and the kids actually moved in with the bastard the next day, although I think Gloria was a little surprised to find that Inga didn't go with them. No, Inga did not stay with me. The nanny agency transferred her to another family on the same day. Although she often came to visit me, she always brought a suitable escort with her. Basically, it was one Agda something, another Swedish girl, a nanny, and apparently Inga's best friend in the UK. But you will hear about these 2 girls later. Now, I wouldn't want anyone to think that I just stood there thunderstruck and took it all in during my confrontation with Gloria. Quite the contrary. In fact, I responded verbally as much as Gloria told me. More, actually, because I, after all, had all the standard cheating bitch repertoire on hand. Gloria's only weapon seemed to be that she didn't think I made enough money to support her in the luxurious lifestyle she would prefer. Somewhat unexpectedly, Gloria did not choose to humiliate my performance in bed. This surprised me, actually. I have been reliably informed that this is usually the weapon of choice in a cheating wife's arsenal, and I'm sure this is the ego's favorite destruction. In fact, much later, Gloria said, "No, I'll come back to that later if the opportunity arises." Of course, things could have gotten violent. I was pretty upset with Gloria, and after all, every person has their own boiling point. If it weren't for the fact that Inga specifically warned me to stay calm and not let situations get out of control, well, who knows what I could have done. Obviously, in a very similar situation, Inga's father could not contain his emotions. As a result, the person got a criminal record for assault or being an abusive husband, or whatever they blame on husbands who went beyond the bounds of reasonable behavior in Sweden. Obviously, this completely ruined his chances in the subsequent child custody battle. Divorce has been a very confusing business, to say the least, and it was quite lengthy too. Mainly because I wasn't going to let my kids live with a creep who had been cheating on my wife behind my back for God knows how long without a fight. Gloria also did not want to lose custody or control of the children, and at one point even tried to convince the court that the girls were not mine at all. But she forgot that the court would not calmly accept her words as the truth, and the judge ordered the appropriate DNA tests to be carried out. It made me wonder, how long has Gloria been cheating on me with that bastard? These thoughts are not conducive to good self-esteem, I can assure you. For what it's worth, in the long run, Gloria may have shot herself in the foot by making that statement. Judges don't like to be deceived. The custody battle was still ongoing the day I went for this interview, and it turned out to be extremely expensive. That's why I needed a big salary to pay all these two-faced legal parasites. There is general agreement in the UK that a mother is the best person to raise children. Of course, provided that she is not an alcoholic or dependent on drugs, and/or the father does not have much more money in his accounts to grease the necessary palms. Now, I know it was a long road, but that's why I was in that interview that day, with the blessing of my current boss, by the way. It was Bill Gillard who suggested that I apply for a position that had a much higher salary scale than he could ever offer me. There were 5 of us who were shortlisted by Goldberg and Sons for 2 positions, accounting department manager and Hisher assistant. According to Bill Gillard, the 2 previous employees of these positions, well, in short, they financed their relationship and subsequent disappearance together at the expense of the company. But this was unofficial information, and Bill swore me to secrecy. We, along with 3 other guys and 1 girl, were asked to come to the Goldbergs' office at 10 in the morning that day. Then all 5 of us were left together, twiddling our thumbs in some sort of waiting room or reception area. We were looked after by Jill Sampson alone until almost 11 o'clock, when 3 members of the interview panel decided to show up. They consisted of the Director of Accounting and the Human Resources Manager, who called himself the Chief of Human Resources, and Jack Goldberg himself. I didn't care about the other 2, but I strongly suspected that Jack Goldberg would reject me on the spot as a suitable candidate for any position. Or at least, once he figures out who I am, he will. Of course, they walked into the room, barely looking in our direction. Well, Jill was sitting at a table on the other side of the room, and she was the kind of woman who gives that impression to most men. I should add that the candidate was attractive too, but I think the secretary just won on points. In any case, then while the other 2 were saying good morning to the delightful Miss Sampson, Jack Goldberg made a quick movement in my direction. I nodded and tried to smile politely, wishing him, "Good morning, sir." He sort of mumbled, "Good morning," in response. Then, after he gave me what I can only describe as a questioning second glance, the 3 of them walked into the conference room where the interviews were to take place, closing the door behind them. An eternity passed before the HR manager came out for a short, whispered conversation with the secretary. I noticed that both times they glanced in my direction as they spoke. At that moment, I realized that I was really wasting a very warm, sunny day. A little later, A buzzer sounded somewhere on Jill's desk, and she asked the first candidate to enter the interview room. The man was there for about half an hour. I really couldn't understand what they could talk about for so long. After all, this was the third and final interview. We went through all the crap on the previous two. As far as I understood, this meeting was about which of the two candidates Goldberg would approve of, and I took it for granted that I would not be included. One of the other guys, who looked a little nervous, tried to strike up a conversation with the rest of us. Only the candidate, and I responded, I think maybe she was just being polite, and the other guy just chuckled. Personally, I didn't care at that point. To be honest, I was still sitting there trying to make Bill Gillard happy. Old grandfather was like a second father to me, and he would have been upset if I hadn't gone through all this. The second guy, the nervous type, was not in the interview room as long as the first. About 10 minutes later, he came out with a depressed look on his face. Then a third candidate was invited. He had, well, I can only explain it as a condescending look on his face as he looked at the candidate and me before he entered. You know, like he already knew he had the job, and this interview was just a formality. The guy was there for a good 40 minutes, and when he came out, his expression was like the cat who found the cheese. Either way, he looked like a man who knew he had a job to do, and that was the end of it. The secretary then asked Vernia Poole to come in. She smiled sweetly at me before disappearing behind the large oak door. I admit that for a moment I wished I wouldn't get the job. Somehow I realized that this horny HR manager was not going to let Vernia Poole leave so easily. Yeah, well, I've seen the way he looked at her in previous interviews, and being a bit of a wolf back in the day, well, let's just say I could read his mind. Vernia rushed back out 20 minutes later. The smile on her face told me that, subject to confirmation of references, she would definitely be joining the Goldberg staff in the near future. Strangely, she smiled at me again and said, "See you soon," before leaving the office. I kind of realized that Vernia thought that I would be looking for her around the city or something like that. I wasn't wearing my wedding ring anymore, and I noticed she wasn't wearing any rings either, if you know what I mean. "Graham, try to focus on the reason you are here," a small voice said in the back of my mind as Vernia disappeared down the hallway. "Oh, come on, you know this is a complete waste of time. I might as well get something out of this day." My consciousness responded. "And you think you can flirt with her when they turn you down for a job?" The voice answered. "Mr. Spark, please come in now." Interrupting my mental musings, the lovely Jill Sampson smiled at me. Surprisingly, the HR manager sat in the center, with the accounting director on the right and Goldberg on the left. Goldberg's seat was moved further away from the table. The HR manager asked all the questions while Goldberg looked at me like I had fallen from the moon. The questions were predictable, to say the least, and most I had already answered before, either in writing on my application or in previous interviews. But the whole time I answered them again, I felt Jack Goldberg's eyes boring me. Finally, he deigned to speak. "Mr. Spark, your face seems very familiar to me, but I can't remember where from. Have we met somewhere before?" It's starting, I thought. I imagined how the next few minutes would pass. "Yes, Mr. Goldberg. We've met many times in the past, a few years ago, when Kynella and I dated for a while." "Weird, I don't remember the name." Goldberg began to speak, leaning back in his chair and squinting to notice. Vernia warned me and continued, "Jerry Hartwell, HR manager, he's buying a drink at the bar." "Damn, he's coming here." "Damn it, I'm sorry if our meeting puts you in an awkward position, Vernia." I managed to whisper before Hartwell's shadow covered the table. "Vernia, Mr. Spark, it's nice to see you getting to know each other. May I join you?" Hartwell asked. Then, without waiting for an answer, he sank into the seat next to Vernia and placed the envelope on the table in front of her. "Your formal invitation to join the company staff, Vernia, for the position we talked about earlier." He smiled at her. Then he turned to me. "Mr. Spark, may I call you Graham?" I guess I nodded in response. "Graham, our meeting here is very fortunate. I need to give you an apology from Mr. Goldberg." Let me explain. Jack never mixes home life with business. Well, at least he doesn't mix it up anymore, but your presence today took him by surprise and threw him off balance. Jack sincerely regrets if he inadvertently implied that you might have had some kind of connection with, well, what some people consider to be an illegal group of people. Mr. Goldberg didn't know you'd be so sensitive about this, but you probably know more about them than he does. To be honest, I didn't quite understand what Hartwell was talking about. But then suddenly everything fell into place. They thought I pulled out of the interview because Goldberg implied that I was a member of the Hells Angels. However, ignoring the unfortunate consequences of Jack's mistake, which William Gillard assures us is completely out of character, we would still like to offer you the position of department manager, with Vernia here as your deputy, of course. He then placed another envelope on the table in front of me. Vernia chose that moment to grab her envelope and begin to open it. But Jerry Hartwell put his hand on her arm before she could get the letter. Look, I think it's fair to explain why these two positions became vacant at the same time. If you accept the offer, I'm sure you will understand that you will both be closely watched for some time. I wanted to tell all the candidates this from the very beginning, but I was persuaded. You'll soon understand why, but please don't make me talk about it now. In any case, previous employees in these positions falsified the books together. Both were married, and we discovered that they had been carrying on an illicit affair for several years. They ended up making off with quite a large portion of the company's annual turnover. Jack Goldberg was forced to invest a lot of money into the organization to prevent it from going bankrupt. Surely the company accountant noticed something strange was going on, I asked. You'd think so, wouldn't you? Eventually, the company's bank accounts were overdrawn significantly. But unfortunately, the director in charge of our accounts at the time was ill for most of last year, and the person in your position, Graham, sort of filled in for him temporarily. This gave him what you might call a golden opportunity. He blew the company dry in 7 months and then disappeared before the bank became too worried. Taking your girlfriend with you, I guess? Vernia asked. Yes, they both disappeared into nowhere. They were last seen boarding the ferry to Denmark at Harwich. The police have no idea where they went after that. Everything was classified because, well, it wasn't just Goldberg and Sons that was under threat, but all the other businesses Jack was involved in as well. Jack was forced to borrow large sums from most of them to keep the company afloat. I wanted to tell you this in advance because your daily work will be scrutinized for a while. All the candidates were vetted, of course, and I suppose that's why Jack was so surprised to find out who you were, Graham. Oh, by the way, Jack Goldberg has been completely absent from the hiring process up to this point, for reasons that will become apparent eventually. Unfortunately, his naive assumption that anyone who rode a motorcycle must have been a member of the Hells Angels caused him to react the way he did. Are you sure? I would have thought it was because I was dating Ellie. No, I think Jack Goldberg learned his lesson from that. Now he completely avoids interfering with Canella's relationship. Mrs. Goldberg, however, is a different matter entirely. I suspect she's still interfering, but Canella seems to blame his parents for everything. Now she's on her own. Why? What happened? I asked. Sorry, Graham, but I don't think it's my role to discuss Canella's problems, especially under these circumstances. Whether Hartwell intended to intrigue me or not, he succeeded. He was hinting at something, and I wanted to know what it was. What are these circumstances? I asked. For a second or two Hartwell looked embarrassed, or perhaps ashamed that he had said too much, but he quickly recovered. Well, if you ever courted Canella, Graham, I guess Jack and Mrs. Goldberg didn't approve. Hartwell smiled. You can bet you didn't approve, I answered with a smile. But how do you know? Graham, something made you leave that interview in a hurry, and if it wasn't because of Jack's remark about the Hells Angels, then what else could it be? Whatever it is, let's say that Jack Goldberg has at least learned not to interfere with Canella's love life in the future, and I suspect never mix family and business again. You have me confused, Mr. Bojiti Hartwell. Graham, if you accept the offer, I'm sure you'll understand the situation very soon. It's not my role to share such personal information. I will now leave you and Vernia to review your proposals. I would be pleased if you would let us know if you will accept them tomorrow morning. Mr. Hartwell, if Graham resigns, who will I have to work with? Vernia asked. John Trent, the third candidate we saw today, is right in front of you, Vernia. Oh shit. Well, I'm sure you'll be working with Graham. A proposal like this doesn't happen often. Graham, I can assure you of that. Have a good lunch. Suddenly, Hartwell left, and Vernia sat looking at me. Well, open it. Look, Graham, if you don't take this job, then I won't either. I'm not going to work with that arrogant jerk, no matter how much money I need. I opened the letter and quickly skimmed through it until I reached the financial part. The numbers there shocked me so much that I must have sat there staring at the line with my mouth open. The Earth calls Major Tom. Reception. Vernia brought me back to Earth. Jesus Christ, I answered. Oh yes, but remember, this is only a 3-month contract to start with. What? Salary is what you look at, isn't it? Vernia continued. Well, our contracts are only for 3 months at the beginning. I suspect they are hedging their bets after. Well, you know what I mean. You know, I must have subconsciously noticed it at that moment, but it didn't register until I was talking to Bill Gillard later that day that although Vernia had opened her proposal, she hadn't actually read it. I'm not sure, but from my memory I would say she was sitting holding the letter in front of her as if she was looking through it. But her eyes were absolutely on my face when I read mine. It was only noticed when Bill Gillard told me that the director in charge of the Goldbergs accounts was apparently on loan from Thakes, a local accounting firm. Suddenly, I remembered that Vernia had mentioned that she was currently working for a local accounting company. Although this was nothing unusual, I was just trying to remember if Vernia had mentioned the name of the company she currently works for. Bill was still talking about how great the opportunity Goldberg was offering me and assuring me that if things didn't work out, there would always be a place for me in the department when I asked him if he'd heard of Vernia Poole. Bill seemed to know every accountant worth his salt within a 50-mile radius. He'd definitely heard of John Trent, the guy Vernia didn't like so much. Apparently, Bill's golf club had a membership requirement of being an accountant. Vernia Poole, yes, of course. I think this must be Reggie Poole's daughter. There can't be too many Vernias, can there? Reggie Poole is one of the partners at Thakes. Bill smiled at me. Hey, is this the girl they plan to be your assistant? If so, then you're in luck, boy. Reggie says she really knows her stuff. Yes, it must be her. Looks like I've been followed from the very beginning. I answered, probably a little angrily. Hey, wait, Graham. Do not get mad. I know Reggie thinks Vernia will go far, but for obvious reasons he can't. You know, give her the edge in thanks. This will leave room for other partners to do the same, and some of their children. Well, let's just say some of them wouldn't last long working here for me. No, what you need to remember, Graham, is that after their last little fiasco, Goldberg and Sons are looking for absolute honesty. When they asked for my advice, I suggested it to you. They probably did the same with Thanks, and someone there must have suggested Vernia. I would say that you were both chosen because you had never met before. Okay, and maybe to watch each other too. Before I could enter the house, Inga and Agda entered the front door. Inga never returned the key to the house, and for some unknown reason, I did not think to ask for it. By the way, this could be due to the fact that Inga secretly came to the house during the day, cleaned and washed my clothes, etc. And oh well, when her social life allowed, Inga was simply an excellent cook. I never dared stop for a drink on the way home from the office, just in case the girls were cooking something delicious in the kitchen. Look, I'm not a chef, never have been. Perhaps this is why Inga and Agda made sure that I had good home-cooked food several evenings each week and both days on the weekend. Of course, we must add the fact that none of the girls were particularly pleased with the masters they were working for at the time. They also regularly showed up at the house with potential boyfriends. I think my vote determined whether guys would get a second date or not. Where I was, I got lost in stupid details again, didn't I? Oh yes, Inga was enthusiastic about the job offer. Obviously, she understood my situation in terms of fighting for custody of the children, and at that stage, it was she, more than anyone else, who pushed me to continue the fight. Deciding to accept Goldberg's offer, I invited both girls to a fancy dinner to celebrate. Unfortunately, this angered their owners because I brought them home well after midnight, who complained to the nanny agency, which in turn scolded both girls and informed their parents. Strangely, this did not achieve what it should have, because I met Inga's father several times when she worked for us, and he considered me to be a reliable person. Apparently, he knew Agda's parents well, and therefore the agency was practically told not to meddle in other people's affairs, or so Inga told me. In the end, both Inga and Agda left the agency completely, but more on that later. Taking this job really wasn't a difficult decision because I needed the extra money. So the next morning, I called Jerry Hartwell to formally accept the offer. The extraordinary salary increase was just what I needed to continue fighting for custody of my children. A little strangely, I should add, Jerry Hartwell showed great interest in my court case early on in our acquaintance. Looking back, I was still not sure whether to attach any importance to his interest in my personal problems, although it was reassuring when he informed me that if I ended up being registered with the company, they would provide me with maximum moral support and assistance. He spoke in detail about the company's flexible work schedule, which was introduced to help single mothers, and explained with a smile that the same flexibility extended to single fathers. My first few days at Goldberg were hell. Vernia and I had to understand the complex itself, as well as understand how the company did business in the accounting department. We also discussed among ourselves whether any of the employees were involved in the machinations of our predecessors. According to Take's employees, who took it upon themselves to correct the situation, no evidence was found that any of them were involved. But Vernia and I often thought about this possibility. I'm afraid there are always people in any department with whom you will never be completely comfortable, considering the history of this department. Well, let's just say there were a few employees that Vernia and I never felt comfortable with. Most of them quit over the next 6 months or so. Jack Goldberg caught up with Vernia and me one lunchtime just after we had started and insisted on taking us to lunch with Jerry Hartwell and several other board members. There was no mention of Ellie or the unpleasant scene I caused at the interview. Goldberg just wanted to know how we were getting along. The rest of the conversation during lunch was minor, except for Jerry Hartwell quietly asking me how my legal battles were going as we walked back to the office. After a couple of weeks, things became pretty routine around the office. Everyone seemed to know what they were doing, and once Vernia and I got to know everyone and figured out our responsibilities, things became pretty monotonous. But one day, 5 or 6 weeks after we started working, Vernia ran into my office carrying 2 cups of coffee. This was Vernia's usual way of signaling that she wanted to talk about something or that she had heard some harmless office rumor. Vernia loved to gossip. "Graham, this Roger Surge, the guy you replaced, do you know who he was?" she asked, handing me the coffee and sitting down in her usual chair. For children. Bernie admitted that, like me, he was caught off guard and, "No, I've never heard of him," I replied. Which was true. I had never heard of him until Bill Gillard told me that he had falsified the books at the Goldberg Company and made off with a significant amount of money. Oh my God, everyone kept it a secret. "You wouldn't like that, Vern," I interrupted jokingly. Fortunately, Vernia and I got along very well, and a good understanding quickly developed between us. She was the first to complain that she was rather. Extravagant figures sometimes got in the way. There might have been a little more sexual innuendo than there should have been at times, but we both knew it was all in jest, and only when the office door was firmly closed. "No, stop joking, Graham. This is serious. It's not fair. I really think they should have told you this before they offered you the position." Her expression and tone of voice told me that, whatever the rumor she heard, Vernia believed it to be serious. By the way, everything involving Roger Surge and the Goldberg Company must have been quite serious. He almost brought the company to its knees. Okay, girl, spit it out. What deep, dark secret did you unearth? I smiled back at her. Okay, you asked for it yourself. Right off the shoulder. Your old girlfriend, Canella Goldberg. Well, for the last 6 or 7 years, her name has been Mrs. Canella Surge. Are you kidding? No, really. Roger Surge was old man Goldberg's son-in-law, and therefore your old girlfriend's husband. Holy God. Yes, you can say that again. And that's probably why they never followed him after the CFO suffered a heart attack. They thought that since he was part of the family, and by the way, was supposed to take his place after his retirement, there was no need to keep an eye on the bastard. Oh my God. Poor Ellie. Oh, but that's not all, Graham. Rumor has it that Kynella only married the scoundrel because Mom and Dad thought he was suitable. That kind of explains why Goldberg tried to stay out of and maybe more specifically your employment, doesn't it? Roger Surge was Jack Goldberg's golden boy. It does not make sense. Why would he take the risk of running away with a ton of money when he could have access to all of Goldberg's millions in the long run? Ellie is an only child. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that Kynella realized that he was secretly dating his assistant. Did Ellie know about their affair? I don't know if she knew exactly with whom. But some girls are sure that Kynella suspected that something was going on. Kynella suddenly started appearing in the office, completely unexpectedly. She always took her children with her. The consensus was that she was trying to awaken the bastard's conscience. Kynella made a point of asking Mary how her own children were doing. Oh yes, and the fools didn't take the hint and didn't stop. It seems not, doesn't it? I suspect Roger Surge decided his best option was to lay low for a while and accumulate as much money as possible. Then grab the money and run away before Kynella finds out for sure and throws him out onto the street. I don't think Jack Goldberg would rate that very highly, do he? Poor Jack, despite all his. Why do you sympathize with Jack Goldberg? I don't know. Maybe he thought that his money would buy his daughter a good husband with good manners. More like with bad manners. Have you seen Surge's personal file? No, and you? Well, there's an illegal copy of it floating around the office somewhere. You know, most of the employees here thought they were about to lose their comfortable jobs, and for a while there was a vigilante mentality of, let's find Roger and Mary. No joke, if they were found, I'm sure there would be bloodshed. What about Ellie? How did she survive all this? Who knows? No one has seen her since Roger Surge disappeared. Well, at least no one I can find in the office. Looks like you'll have to ask her dad about that, Graham. You must be joking. Why do I need it? Oh, stop it, Graham. I don't know what happened between you two many years ago. But whatever it is, I would say it's unfinished business in someone's mind. What is this supposed to mean? I asked. A little emotional, I think, judging by Vernia's reaction. Oh, damn, Graham. I'm not going to fight with you about this. Forget I even mentioned this woman. Then, just as quickly as she entered my office, Vernia disappeared again. For several days after our little conversation, Vernia kept disappearing when I tried to get her to explain her words. After all, I must have forgotten about it because we had work to do. Although the work was boring, there were many things to do every day. I spent most of my free time meeting with my lawyers and worrying about how my child custody case was going. Oh yeah, and having fun with young Ingrid and Agda. Even though I was almost old enough to be their father, they wanted to refute Gloria's claim that I was a boring old brat, although I often had to disappoint them in their attempts to arrange a meeting with me. Damn, how these two Swedish girls managed to find so many decent English ladies, I have no idea, but their plan very soon became clear to me. When I called the girls out for a chat, they were very open about what they were doing. As Ingrid put it, the judge will be pleased to see that you have a loving and caring stepmother willing to take care of the children, Graham. I was sure that Ingrid was probably right about this, but unfortunately, there was no chemistry between me and any of the women that Ingrid and Agda found. Note that when I talk about having fun, I don't mean staying out late at night at local nightclubs and the like. I don't really like opera or ballet much, but I was introduced to both, as well as theater. I was also often taken to the proms at the Royal Albert Hall that autumn. I never understood where the girls got tickets for all the places we went. They couldn't be cheap. Either way, they didn't tell me. I have always paid all travel expenses and food and drink expenses. It was the least I could do for two charming young ladies who, if nothing else, tried to lift my spirits, and perhaps kept my anger under control. Gloria and the guy she was living with and publicly calling her fiancé, by the way, when in fact she was still married to me, made it very difficult to maintain a healthy relationship with my daughters. Technically, I had a temporary court order giving me access to the children 4 times a week. But Gloria and this idiot's legal representatives constantly found ways to shorten these visits or often bypass them entirely. These lawyers must have been part of their plans because they always had a plausible explanation for what went wrong when my lawyers complained to the judge. From my point of view, they also had the judge's ear. From the very beginning, I was portrayed as a controlling workaholic who systematically neglected his wife and children. The implication was that I only wanted custody of the children to annoy their loving mother. If I had been smarter, I would have recorded every phone conversation between Gloria and I where we negotiated or even discussed my access. Then the judge might have realized that it was Gloria who kept changing the rules of the game, not me. But by the time I realized it, it was already too late. To be honest, my behavior in the office probably got a little worse with each court hearing. From my point of view, the possibility of obtaining custody of the children was becoming increasingly unlikely. And to make matters worse from my point of view again, my new job meant I had a much healthier bank account for Gloria's lawyers to feast on. I'm talking about potential child support for Gloria. Damn, these guys are damn smart and damn fast. Gloria's lawyers demanded disclosure of my new income before I even received it. In any case, that was the state of affairs on Wednesday morning, when my life took a complete 180-degree turn. The evening before I was at a concert with Ingrid and Agda and returned home quite late as I had to take both girls home. Having risen at the usual time, I felt lazy and decided to have breakfast in a cafe and then lingered there reading the morning newspaper. As a result, it was 9 o'clock when I pulled into my office parking spot. A rather irritated Vernia and our secretary Christina were waiting for me there. "Where the hell have you been, Graham? Everything went to hell. Your lawyer has been trying to contact you since last night," Vernia screamed, climbing into the front seat. "Why? What's happened?" "No time to explain. Sign this so the office can continue to operate today, and then you have to be in court before 10. Your lawyer wanted you there by 9:30, but there's no way we'll make it." For some reason, I always trusted Vernia, so I signed the offered documents on the indicated place without asking questions. For all I knew, I could be signing my own death warrant. Apparently satisfied that I had signed everything, she snatched the papers and handed them to Christina, who wished me luck as Vernia slammed the door. "Okay, let's go. To court and without delay." "Vernia, what?" "Graham, I don't know. All I know is that one of the girls from your lawyer's office has been calling since dawn and said you absolutely need to be in court before it opens today. I realize that your case will be considered out of turn. But why? I don't know, Graham. Something has clearly happened, and judging by the girl's words, you can take the children with you from court today. That's why I came with you. Jerry Hartwell thought you'd need a woman by your side in court. You know, making it look like you're ready for the kids to come home, even if you're not. Christina wanted to go, but I said I would go. You don't need everyone in the office to see your dirty laundry being aired. Why did you have to show up at the last moment today? You usually have coffee with me by 8:30. I don't know, I somehow got carried away with the newspaper after breakfast. Well, we could use this time. Getting across town and finding a parking spot at this time of day will be no joke. Luckily, we found a parking space not far from the court and ran the last few hundred meters without risking entering the court's small parking lot. Inside the courthouse, we were literally grabbed by a young girl I recognized from my lawyer's office and hurriedly escorted through staircases and hallways I had never seen before. I soon discovered that we had actually moved into the next building where the family courts were located. We were not brought into the type of formal courtroom that I had visited previously. Rather, it was a large conference room where everyone was sitting around a very large table and waiting, clearly impatient. "Please sit down, Mr. Tisane Sparks." An officer-looking woman who turned out to be a family court judge commanded me before continuing. "Judge Kroll has other business this morning." Judge Kroll was the old fart who presided over Gloria and I's divorce. I noticed that in this court he seemed to play second fiddle to the family court judge and her advisors. I admit that I still had no idea what the hell was going on, but I noticed that my lawyer was smiling, or rather smirking, at Gloria's lawyer. There was no sign of those dear barristers who usually attended our meetings. The judge cleared her throat, drawing my attention back to her and away from my lawyer. I tried to ask him with my eyes, "What the hell is going on here?" All he could apparently do was grin at his professional opponent. "Mrs. Sparks, this report states that you and the children currently reside in the same home as Ronald Quinn. This is right?" "Yes," Gloria answered confidently. "And it is also assumed that you and Mr. Quinn are going to get married as soon as your divorce from Mr. Tigted Sparks is finalized." "This is right. Yes, as soon as this custody issue is resolved, we will get married." "I see. And how long have you known Mr. Quinn?" "Some years. I don't understand why this matters." "Oh, you'd be surprised, Mrs. Jennings Sparks. Did you know Mr. Quinn's first wife?" No, she died in Scotland before Ronald moved here." Very suddenly, Gloria's confidence began to wane. "But do you know how she and their children died?" "It was an accident. Ronald was found not guilty in court." "Ah, but I'm afraid that's not the case, Mrs. C. Sparks. In Scotland, juries have a third option other than verdicts of guilty or not guilty not proven. This is an English family court, and we have a more flexible approach to evidence than in a regular court. Our first responsibility here is the safety of the children. But Ronald wouldn't hurt the girls. He loves them." "I'm sure he says so, Mrs. Sparks. But I'm also sure that he claims to love you. Please explain to me, if this is the case, how you got 3 broken ribs and under what circumstances you broke 2 teeth last month." "How do you know?" "We have a report that says Ronald Quinn physically assaulted you on several occasions." "No, this is a mistake. Ronald would never intentionally harm me or the children." "I'm afraid Jennifer Quinn thought so too, Mrs. Sparks. She is now dead, as are all 3 Quinn children. This court will not risk something like this happening again." "Okay, I won't marry Ronald. I'll find another place to live." "I'm sorry, Mrs. C. Sparks, but you showed extreme poor judgment by moving the children in with Ronald Quinn in the first place. You made this worse by not holding him accountable for the attacks. This court believes that the safest course of action is to place the children in the custody of their father at this time." Gloria did not give up, and, despite her lawyer's attempts to persuade her to allow him to speak, she continued to argue with the judge until she threatened to remove Gloria from the court. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. C. Sparks, do you have adequate child care facilities?" I wanted to answer, but my lawyer beat me to it. "Mr. Sparks still resides in the matrimonial home. The children's bedrooms are there and ready to be used. He also has 2 nannies known to the children who are ready to move in immediately, and another older nanny who is ready to mentor them. And of course, Mr. Sparks has Miss Poole, who is here to help if needed today." "Do you have experience looking after children, Miss Poole?" "No, madam, but I have 5 younger brothers and sisters that I have helped look after since they were born," Vernia answered. The judge looked at one of her advisors, who smiled and nodded. Then I noticed that the advisor looked at Vernia and smiled. Something in his gaze told me that these 2 women knew each other. I later found out that Vernia and the counselor were high school friends. From that point on, things got a little more complicated, and I can't say exactly what happened because Gloria completely lost control of herself. She became hysterical, and her legal representative tried unsuccessfully to remove her from the courtroom. I don't know why I did it, but I got up from my seat and went to help him. Then I had to calm Gloria down in the hallway. Quite a strange situation considering the circumstances. But in the end, I was able to convince Gloria that I would not behave like her when it came to her contact with children. Of course, I told her I wouldn't tolerate her boyfriend Quinn talking to them. When I returned to the courtroom, everything was already over, and the two lawyers appeared to be finishing up a conversation with the judge who was presiding over the divorce. All the disputes and delays were about child custody, so I'm guessing the family court judge's ruling had prevailed and was ready to put an end to this money farce. The divorce judge smiled at me before leaving for his first case of the day, and Gloria's lawyer left disappointed, I guess, to find her again. Well, we had everything covered, but it was a damn masterstroke, said my lawyer at the moment when the judge disappeared. What was it? Look, Bernie, I have no idea what happened here this morning. When did you find out about Quinn's past? We didn't find out. Your people found out. Didn't they tell you? Anyway, this little act you did with Gloria really pleased the judge. Act? Yes, when you rushed to calm her down, saying that you wanted her to have a close relationship with the children. It was not an act. Gloria is their mother. It would be criminal to keep them apart, after the way she behaved towards you. Wait, Bernie, two wrongs don't make one right, and you know it. Now, I have no idea what happened to Gloria or why she was such a bitch. But I'm damn sure it wouldn't be a good example for our kids if I behaved the same way. Also, the judge said, for now, if I do something stupid, it might come back and bite me. Good point, but I would watch her. Don't let her get under your skin again, Graham. I'm not crazy, Bernie. I'm just willing to be generous. Gloria will be out of my life as soon as you and that old brat get the divorce paperwork done. But that doesn't mean I want to keep Gloria out of our children's lives. If she behaves herself, it shouldn't take long. Family court decisions regarding child custody will take precedence, so I would say the judge will sign the papers this afternoon. How did we end up here today? That report on Ronald Quinn that your people sent us yesterday. We sort of took the contents of it to social services along with a few unsavory suggestions, and suddenly everything took off. Quinn was accused of setting his home on fire and killing his wife and children 15 years ago. Fortunately for us, the Scottish jury returned a verdict of not proven. Now, not proven does not mean not guilty under the law, but it stained enough to scare local social workers here. We just gave them ammo and pointed them in the right direction. And of course, there are those unexplained injuries to Gloria. How did you know that he beat her? We didn't find out. It was all in the report that your people sent us. Damn, Graham, I wish you would tell us you had them. Bernie, I have no idea who you're talking about. The only people who worked on my divorce were your people. You are sure? Bernie, you and your people squeezed all the juice out of me. Where would I get money for someone else? Besides, your investigators should have been handling all of this. Graham, this report came from Thomas Associates. They are the best in the business. We would never dare entrust you with such an expensive item. Plus, they do background checks for business people in the city. I've never heard of them doing a divorce case. Well, I didn't hire them. That's strange, Bernie said, leafing through a stack of papers taken from his briefcase. There are only the initials JH on the documents. Do you know who it is? Jerry Hartwell, that must be him, said Vernia, who was standing next to me. He is the director of human resources at the Goldberg company. Well, he would have enough influence to interest Thomas Associates. Bernie said. Yes, but who pays this bill? I asked. JH, I think. Vernia smiled and squeezed my hand. It looks like Jack Goldberg wants to keep you, Graham. I told you he doesn't hold a grudge against Canella. At that moment, some woman from social services came up to tell us where we could pick up the children. They were in a room just down the hall. Vernia and I learned from various people that after receiving a copy of the report, social services obtained an immediate court order and took the children into their care the previous evening. Quinn himself tried to prevent this and was somewhere in a cell for assaulting a police officer. That explained why he wasn't with Gloria in family court. After introducing the children, who were very happy to see their dad, To Vernia, whom they immediately liked, we headed towards the exit of the building. On the way, I asked Bernie how he knew that Ingrid and Agda would be nannies. He acted at random. He met with Ingrid several times. She was a witness regarding Gloria's infidelity, and as it turns out, she told him she wanted to take care of the children if I won custody. I'm guessing Ingrid also mentioned Agd. What about an experienced mentor? I asked. Geez, Graham, both of these girls are studying childcare in addition to English while they're here. Their teacher rates them very highly. Have you talked to their teachers? Certainly. There is no point in bringing a witness before a judge without knowing everything there is to know. Like, for example, the fact that Ronald Quinn is a murderer. Oh, come on, Graham. Quinn did a damn good job of covering his tracks, sealed court records, and all. This requires organizations like Thomas Associates, which perform background checks for the government, to bypass the kind of precautions it has taken. Okay, I forgive you. Now we need to get the kids home and get them settled. Luckily, the children were at an age where they had little idea what was going on. The past 24 hours had been a bit traumatic for them. But as soon as the dog tried to lick them to death, the cat was not so happy to see them and immediately ran into the garden, and they saw their old rooms. It was as if they had never left. Of course, they asked several times where Mom was. Vernia and I somehow avoided answering. Around 4 o'clock, a couple of people from Bernie's office arrived with the children's things. Social services only gave us 2 small suitcases, which they took from Quinn's house. They explained that these were all the children's remaining belongings and that Quinn was back in jail. I later learned that Ronald Quinn returned home from the magistrate's court to find Gloria getting ready to leave, and he apparently didn't like it. I don't know what happened between them, but they made enough noise that one of the neighbors called the police. No one knows what happened next, but they eventually arrested Quinn again, allegedly for assaulting Gloria. She did not appear to have suffered serious injuries, or at least there was no visual evidence of them, when I met her a few days later in court to sign the relevant paperwork. It's possible the police decided to arrest Quinn again to give Gloria a chance to complete her move. Since she didn't know where she would live, Gloria called her lawyers for advice on what to do with the children's belongings that she couldn't take with her. They then called Bernie's office with the same question, and he sent a couple of his assistants to pick up the items and deliver them to me. I knew you wouldn't be in the mood to go to Quinn's to pick up their things after the kids got home, Bernie told me later that week with a smile. He also explained that Gloria was temporarily staying with her sister. I was under the impression that Gloria had persuaded 2 of Bernie's assistants to take her to her sister's on the way to my house. No wonder Gloria is a beautiful woman who has spent her entire life knowing how to deceive innocent young men. I planned to call Ingrid after she returned from college, but both girls came to my house shortly after the kids' things arrived. Whether it was someone from Bernie's office contacting them at college or seeing the kids at home, they just realized what was going on, I don't know. But the girls immediately took charge of the children, which gave Vernia the opportunity to return to the office before it closed. We put the excited kids to bed before Vernia came back to our house again. This time with my fiancé. I had never met him before, but I soon realized that Vernia was the leader in their relationship. Before the evening ended, he complained to me that his beloved was a career woman who was still in no hurry to get married and have children. However, as the weeks passed and Vernia continued to bring poor Tony into the house regularly. In fact, he cheered up a little because he thought my babies were making Vernia ready for motherhood. But that was all in the future. The next day, both girls moved into my home without much discussion. That evening, I learned that Bernie wasn't the only one who suggested that they would be the children's nannies if I won custody. There had to be 2 so one could stay home while the other went to college. The advantage of partial courses. Another thing worth mentioning is that I had to hire them as Nana's housewives. They no longer lived in my house as couples. However, they had already done almost all the housework since Gloria left. Leaving the children with Ingrid and Agda, I was able to get to the office for a couple of hours the next day, where I was greeted with applause from my entire staff. I really don't know what I did to deserve this. I suppose this could be a show of support from my colleagues. Of course, I had to sign all these documents again, trusting that Vernia had read them all, before I could go up to Jerry Hartwell to discuss the report from Thomas Associates. Nothing to do with me, old man. I'm just a small fry. Are you saying that Jack Goldberg ordered you to hire Thomas Associates? No, not really, Graham. Their routine background check on you was the basis for this report, but they were asked to do, well, a slightly more extensive report on your family and their connections in the hopes that it might help you. Jack approved the expenses, of course, but you'll have to look elsewhere for the initiator. Jerry? I asked demandingly. No, Graham, I'm sorry. I was sworn to secrecy, Jerry said sternly, but then smiled at me. Tell me, who do you know who would have such an influence on Jack Goldberg? Damn, Thomas Associates aren't cheap. And by the way, who recently went through a divorce? Ellie? I promised not to say that name, Graham. Please don't waste your time asking me questions again. Jerry smiled. I thought she didn't even know I worked here. Oh, now, you may think of Jack Goldberg as a miserable old man, Graham, but he is the first to admit his mistakes. I would assume that some unnamed person knew instantly when you accepted a job offer at the company. Well, to be completely honest, and without naming names, a certain small fry knows exactly what he knows, and she often calls him to check on you. So I should call her and thank her. Oh God, no, she'll kill me. Canella was adamantly opposed to me telling you that she... What is she, Jerry? Oh, come on, Graham. You can't be that stupid. Canella has a soft spot for you. Very weak, I would say. She made me promise to give you some bullshit about how Thomas Associates found all this dirt on Quinn during their investigation into your background. But I thought it would be fairer to both of you if you knew how things worked out. You're confusing me, Jerry. Damn it, Graham, you're a good, nice guy who's getting divorced with 2 little kids, almost. Canella is a very sweet young woman who is also recently divorced with 2 little ones. Now, from what Vernia told me, you and Canella once made a wonderful couple. I'm just trying to say that Canella may be wondering if you're okay. I just want to give you a hint, my friend. Thanks for telling me, Jerry. But everything that happened between me and Canella ended many years ago. I'm not divorced yet, and I'm definitely not looking for a new wife. Not now, not ever. Please don't be offended, Graham. I was just trying to warn you. Canella used her influence with Jack to help you. I thought it would be fair if you found out. I'm not angry, Jerry, just confused. It's not like Canella has even stopped by since I started working here. She doesn't come here anymore, Graham. She is too ashamed that it was her husband who almost destroyed the company. It's a shame, actually. Canella was well received by everyone here. No doubt she'll show up again after all. She's always been a regular part of all of Jack's social team building activities. I don't remember her missing any of them until Quinn ran away. Back at the office, I quickly went through everything with Vernia and then rushed home again to see. Well, I'm not entirely sure why. I think I went home to make sure the kids were okay, as it turned out. Ingrid and Agda had everything under control. The only problem was that the children were asking where their mother was. Oh, Jerry told me that the company, or rather Jack Goldberg, I guess expected that I would need a couple of weeks of flexibility, as I like that word, in my work hours before I could return to normal work. They had as much confidence in Vernia as I did, maybe even more, to be honest. With the custody dispute all but resolved, the divorce judge issued a decree nisi later that week. The family court order at the time was also a temporary emergency solution to remove the children from Ronald Quinn. Theoretically, Gloria could have contested it, but apparently her not taking legal action against Quinn when he first started beating her, but continuing to live with him and keeping the kids in the house as well, didn't do her any favors in the eyes of the social workers. So it didn't reflect well on her in front of the family court judge. At our second meeting in family court, where updated reports from social services were presented about how the children were settled and how they were settling in, the children were officially released into my care indefinitely. Ingrid and Agda were subpoenaed in my and Gloria's absence, I assumed at the time, so the judge could approve my child care plans. And there was a hint from Bernie that someone suggested that there might be something fishy between me and one of the girls. Either way, it didn't lead to anything and probably didn't do that someone any favors in the eyes of the judge. To be honest, I'm not sure what was going on behind my back, but the family courts in the UK seemed self-governing at the time. The topic of alimony was raised, although I did not ask for any payments from Gloria. Whether I wanted it or not, an order was made that she should pay me a few pounds every month. Bernie told me this was to set a precedent if our circumstances ever changed. At that time, I was making good money, but Gloria was unemployed. She found one rich bastard, Graham, even if he beat her. You never know, she might find herself another rich fool next time, Bernie chuckled. I have to admit that deep down, I really didn't like Bernie very much. But then again, I've never been particularly attached to anyone in the legal profession. They always seem more interested in finding ways to get around the law and making money than in the moral aspects of life. The court issued an order regarding Gloria's access to the children. In general, it prescribed that she must have access for at least 2 hours at any time, at least 52 times a year. A strange order that I had difficulty understanding until one of Bernie's employees, Bernie himself, was not in court that day, explained that Gloria supposedly had relatives abroad. There was speculation from some unknown person that she might try to run away with the children and remove them from the jurisdiction of the British courts if her visits were longer. I thought it was a ridiculous idea and suspect it was someone in Bernie's organization retaliating against allegations about the girls and me. Meanwhile, someone from Bernie's office, or maybe it was the original report from Thomas Associates, learned that Gloria had somehow amassed an unexpectedly impressive bank balance. So she did have the resources that would have allowed her to run away with her children if given the opportunity. I was also informed that Gloria didn't stay with her sister for more than a few weeks before she rented herself a really nice apartment in the city. She also quickly rented an expensive car. Maybe it was the fact that she was leasing rather than buying the car that made someone in Bernie's office suspicious of her intentions. I later learned that Gloria started working as a very expensive available girl a few days after moving out of Quinn's house. Hey, who knows, maybe she was already working like this before she left me. No, forget it. It's just me being vindictive. But it might explain how Gloria suddenly has an impressive bank balance. I would be happy if Gloria had much more access to the children than the court ordered. But after the first few weeks, when she came into the house almost every day, her visits dropped sharply. At the time, I had no idea about her new job, so I assumed she had found another guy. Hey, maybe it was. Perhaps this kind of work was Gloria's way of finding another rich fool. This thought never occurred to me at the time. The children quickly got used to Gloria's absence. Mind you, they would go crazy if Ingrid or Agda weren't around for more than a few days. It got to the point where all 5 of us flew to Sweden for a week just before Christmas so the girls could visit their families at the same time. Agda's parents and Ingrid's father stayed with me several times when they came to London to visit their daughters. I never met Ingrid's mother or her boyfriend. While in Sweden, I missed the company's Christmas party. But when I returned, Vernia quickly noted that Kynella had appeared there, to the obvious delight of everyone. Oh my God, Graham, it was like the Queen or something came in. Everyone stood up, applauded, and shouted. Poor Kynella looked very embarrassed. But I think everyone was trying to show her how much they loved her and didn't blame her for what happened. Jerry brought her to our table and introduced me and Tony. She congratulated us on our engagement, so someone should tell her all the gossip. She also seemed to be looking for someone at our table until Jerry told her you were in Sweden. She looked very disappointed then. Tony danced with her afterwards, and he told me she asked him about you and the kids. Tony thinks she already knew that we come to your house often. Probably someone there, Vernia nodded towards the office, is telling her all the gossip that's going on here. I'm not sure how I responded to Vernia's statement. I thought she was the biggest gossip in the office herself. But then again, maybe Vernia listens more than she talks, if you know what I mean. She only told me what she heard and what she thought I needed to know. Gloria stopped by early on Christmas morning with gifts for the children, but she didn't stay for the Christmas dinner we offered her. Apparently, she had other plans. No, I didn't ask. At that moment, I assumed it was with the new guy, although now I suspect it was probably a client. Looking back and considering how Gloria was dressed that morning, I would not have been surprised to learn that she had come straight from a meeting with a previous client. At the start of the new year, Jack Goldberg and his wife invited Vernia and I along with a guest, each to a cocktail party at their home. We couldn't refuse, considering who issued the invitation, but it was I, if not Vernia, who had the problem with the guest. After we had gone through the entire list of possible candidates for my partners for the evening, Tony suggested that he stay home while Vernia and I went together. There was an idea that I would take Ingrid or Agda indeed. I often went out with one of the girls in the evenings, but usually only to the theater and similar places. Sometimes I would go to the show twice so both girls could see it. Other times I would take both girls while Vernia and Tony babysat our kids. By the way, we saw Gloria a couple of times with one of her clients. It was very awkward, I thought. But at that moment, I thought it was her boyfriend. I can't say that cocktail parties are my thing. It was the first really big party I've ever been to. It was helpful that Vernia's parents were also invited, and I spent a lot of time talking with them once we were introduced. I learned that the general consensus was that Vernia's beginning to show interest in my children was the main reason she had finally set a wedding date with Tony. Vernia, of course, knew almost everyone there because she had grown up in this circle. Her father was a member of the same golf club as Jack Goldberg. In any case, often in the evenings, she would disappear to hang out with friends and acquaintances, leaving me to talk to her parents. Apparently, there was a lot of confusion about why Vernia came with me and not Tony. It was something we didn't think about in advance. In the end, as was destined, I came across the dragon herself, Mrs. Jack Goldberg. Taking me completely off guard and further confusing everyone, she instinctively called me Sparky, and what's even more surprising, with a smile on his face. God, I've never seen the old witch smile before. But then again, I was Sparky back then, and I admit that I like the fame. Jack and I have known Sparky for years. I heard Mrs. G explain to the puzzled crowd. You wouldn't recognize him as the young outlaw we once knew. You know, at some point we thought that he could become our son-in-law. I couldn't believe the pleasant smile on the old witch's face as she spoke. We thought that he could become our son-in-law, but it's not like that. They were afraid that he might become, rather, these are the thoughts that were spinning in my head. I realized it was the right time to find a toilet, before I say something stupid that I'll regret later. So I apologized and left Vernia and her parents to talk to the witch. On my way back from the restroom, I had just bumped into the waitress and was grabbing another glass of whatever she was passing around when I heard the old nickname come up again. A familiar voice said, "Hi, Sparky. How is Bonnie doing? Are you still riding her?" Bonnie, of course, was the name I gave my old Triumph, so I knew there was only one person behind me. "Hi, Ellie," I said, turning on my heel to face her. No, Bonnie went to that big landfill in heaven many years ago. Anyway, long time no see, how are you doing? I know. Stupid and predictable statement. But what else was I supposed to tell this woman? I couldn't very well say what I was thinking. Damn, honey, you look fucking gorgeous. Can I? Although I have to admit that's exactly what I was thinking. Not very good, Sparky. You probably heard about what my husband did. And you definitely heard about what my wife did to me, so you could say we're on equal terms, Ellie. Now are we going to stand here and complain to each other, or is it better to forget about those scoundrels as if they never existed? How do you do it? You always knew how to leave your problems behind. What happened, happened, Ellie. There's not much point in crying over spilled milk, right? I try to put the past behind me and do my best to forget all the unpleasant things that happen in life. What about the good things? And this, Ellie, is what we need to remember, the good times. Gloria and I really had some good times together, you know. And those good times you and I had on Bonnie and in the back seat of my little Vive. I smiled. Very good times, Ellie, all saved for easy access when I'm sad. However, I can't forget that someone else forgot about them and moved on. Ellie looked serious for a moment. No, she didn't forget Sparky. Unfortunately, she heard all sorts of stories about other girls riding Bonnie. I can assure you that no one went. Well, not until it became obvious that someone had forgotten I existed. That wasn't the story I heard. So you listened to the wrong storytellers, Ellie. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'd better go back to my Vernia. I have to accompany her tonight. After the pleasure of seeing Ellie for the first time in years, I was a little annoyed that she accused me of abandoning her. I've always seen it exactly the opposite. Can I go with you? I don't like to be alone at such events. As long as you remember that my name is now Graham Sparks, of course you can. Excuse me, of course, Mr. Graham Sparks, manager of the accounting department, and a very good one, I am told. Somehow Ellie managed to put her hand in mine as we walked back to the place where I left Vernia and her parents. Honestly, I didn't notice until I saw a couple of people looking at us. Remember, they were quite puzzled when I came to the party with Vernia on my arm, a young woman whose upcoming wedding to Tony had recently been very publicly announced. Notice that Ellie didn't stop talking during the short journey. Ellie continued to chat about people we knew and places we visited together. And I'll add, about a couple of places where we regularly parked in her Vauxhall Viva. Vernia greeted us with a wide smile. Hey guys, they're dancing in the other room. Shall we go and join them? It will be great, Ellie replied before I could say anything. The next thing I knew, I had Ellie on one arm and Vernia on the other, and I was being dragged into another room where a small band was playing. You first, he is your companion for the evening, Ellie said to Vernia, opening her hands and taking my glass. Can't I say anything? I asked. No, both women answered in unison. He hates formal dancing, Ellie Vernia commented. Oh, he's better than before, I assure you, Vernia answered. How do you know? I asked, just to say something to prove that I was still capable of speaking for myself, I guess. Ingrid and Agda told me that you danced well in Stockholm. I need to fire these girls, they talk too much, I replied as Vernia led me onto the dance floor. Oh, let me know if you fire them. I really need a good nanny for my girls. I heard Ellie laugh when we moved away from her hearing. And what are you doing? I asked Vernia when she finally came into my arms to dance. I'm just trying to show everyone what a good dancer you've become. Stop doing that. You know what I'm talking about. Okay, Ellie was looking. I don't know, you two were talking to each other, and suddenly she didn't look as happy as I expected. I thought she must have blurted something out and needed a break before the second round. What are you talking about now? Listen, Graham, as you have rightly said many times, I have no idea what went wrong between you and Canella, but I know that she regrets that it happened, and I believe that deep down you regret it too. She tries her best to help you, and even her mother, whom you always described as a complete vixen, says the nicest things about you. God, you should at least give Canella a chance. I must? Yes, you damn well should. The conversation continued in the same vein throughout the dance. Well, if you can call it dancing, Vernia and I weren't dancing so much as we were arguing, moving in a circle. Here, it's your turn. Don't take on any nonsense, Canella. He can be a bore when he wants to be, Vernia said to Ellie, handing me over to her. On a side note, I noticed several young men approaching Ellie while Vernia and I were dancing. I can only assume that they asked her to dance and that she refused. I should have taken it as a compliment whether I liked it or not. I managed to take a sip of whatever was in the glass before Vernia took it from me, and Ellie pulled me back onto the dance floor. Very quickly, I realized that Ellie was extremely nervous, her verbal diarrhea starting again as soon as we left Vernia's hearing. Ellie, please relax. Whatever happened many years ago, I am sure that it was not your fault or mine. We were young, and these things happen. Let's leave the past in the past. Now tell me about your children. For the rest of the evening, whether it was dancing or not, I alternated dancing with both girls. We did just that. We talked about our children and how we cope with them alone. Only I didn't quite cope alone, as you well know. Surprisingly, our children were almost the same age and all girls. I realized that Ellie's mother was there almost every day to provide moral support. This is when she wasn't busy with one of her charities. Ellie complained that what she hated most was being alone at night. I agreed, but she immediately called me out on the fact that I had Ingrid and Agda, so that they could keep me company in the evenings. I think Ellie was referring to a different part of the night than I was. Like most men, I thought about the fact that there was no one next to me in bed to cuddle with. I left this moment without attention. In any case, from these words I realized that Ellie knew everything about my home conditions. I kind of wondered how much more she knew. A lot, as I expected. I was sure she had seen Thomas' report. I did not thank her for persuading her father to approve the expense of this report at that moment. I thought that we would leave this for some other more private case. Vernia and I planned to leave around midnight. Well, that was the time we agreed that Tony would pick us up. We were about to put on our coats when one of Jack Goldberg's assistants came looking for us with a message that Tony's car had broken down and that we should call a taxi. But Ellie didn't want to hear it. She said that she was going to leave herself and would take us home. I politely tried to refuse. I didn't want to be accused of taking her away from her parents' party. You weren't afraid of my ride before, Graham, so why are you now? Ellie smiled. Besides, I have to get back to the children. I only have a young neighbor looking after them. Good nannies are hard to find where I live. However, her rush to get back to the kids seemed to weaken as soon as we got into her car. She drove first to where Tony had broken down, arriving there almost at the same moment as the tow truck. Then she drove us to Vernia's parents' house, where I assumed Tony stayed the night. Then, finally, around 2 o'clock in the morning, we arrived at my house. For some inexplicable reason, I invited Ellie to come in and meet Ingrid and Agda, who were looking out the living room window as we pulled up. Ellie refused, saying that she really had to go back to her children, but she would accept the invitation another time because she really wanted to meet the two young ladies that Vernia had talked so much about. 2 evenings later, I came home from the office to find Ellie's car in my driveway and Gloria's car parked on the street. I expected Gloria to be there that evening, but not Ellie and her 2 children. It was actually quite fun when I looked into the living room. Pamela was much more interested in her new friend Simone than in the presence of her mother. And although Deborah was sitting or being held on her mother's lap, her interest was directed towards the little stranger Ingrid was holding. Agda and Ellie were in the kitchen making tea when I entered. Sorry, Graham. Looks like I picked a bad day to come by, Ellie said with a smile and a wink when she saw me standing in the doorway. All I had time to say in response was, "Don't worry, Ellie," before I noticed Agda making all sorts of weird faces at me and nodding her head towards the living room door where Ingrid, Gloria, and the kids were. I could not understand this pantomime and clearly showed it on my face. Agda finally pulled me into the kitchen, closed the door, and grinned. Mrs. Sparks doesn't know who Miss Ella is. She is trying to ask us, and at the same time not ask. It was very funny to watch. We didn't explain it like we should have. I realized I missed out on some fun. Ellie, by chance, happened to be in my area and stopped by in case I was at home. She introduced herself to Ingrid and Agda, and then brought her children to meet mine. Something like that, it seems. But then Gloria came, and the 3 women conspired to play a game with her. They were evasive about who Ellie was, deliberately leaving out her last name, Goldberg. Ellie started using her maiden name again for obvious reasons. When Gloria finally asked her directly, Ellie replied that she was an old and very close friend. From what they said, Gloria was stunned by this statement and continued to try to find out where Ellie and I met and how long we had known each other. None of the 3 conspirators gave her a direct answer to any of her questions. although Gloria continued to suggest different places where we could meet. I know it was morally wrong, but I let the game continue as we brought the tea and coffee that Agda and Ellie had prepared into the living room. I have no idea why Gloria was so upset about Ellie or her presence in the house, but she was definitely upset, and I watched with pleasure her disappointed curiosity. Gloria couldn't really believe there was a chance for us to reconcile after the way she behaved. Perhaps she didn't like the idea that I might find someone else to share my life with. Regardless, it was a fun show while it lasted. To be honest, at that moment, I really didn't think there would be a romantic connection between me and Ellie. Even if Vernia thought it was possible, I was once infatuated with this woman and got burned. Friendship, yes, and even, perhaps, close friendship. But romance, I really didn't think it was possible. Ellie was the first to get up to leave. In fact, I think Gloria sat her out. She didn't usually stay that long. As I walked Ellie and her kids to the car, she asked if I had dinner plans the next night. I will sit with the children. Ingrid and Agda have a double date tomorrow evening. They believe in the rule of safety in numbers. I'm not surprised with you next to me, Ellie laughed in response. I'm sure I would have kept my virginity a lot longer if we only went on double dates. Anyway, it's no problem. Bring the kids to dinner. Deborah should go to bed very early, Ellie. Michelle, too. We can put Deborah in the travel crib I have for her. And if it's too late, Pamela can lie with Simone. They seem to like each other. Well. Oh, don't worry. I'm not going to jump on your bones. I have enough spare beds and bedrooms in the house. I just don't like being alone every evening. It would be nice to just sit and talk about old times, and maybe even completely clear up some misunderstandings. Oh, we have an audience. Let's put on a show for her. What? I was about to say as Ellie kissed me on the cheek before getting into the car and closing the door. Gloria is looking at us from your living room window. Graham, lean over and kiss me before I leave. But what about... God, don't look so confused, honey. Now smile and kiss me. I will call you at the office tomorrow. I did as Ellie asked, and then she sped off, honking her horn. Gloria was getting ready to leave when I returned to the house. Who is this woman? She demanded as I walked her to the door. Just an old friend, I grinned back at her. As an old friend, how long have you known her? And who was that little girl you were in court with? This girl is Veronica, actually Vernia, Gloria, and she is not a little girl. I think you've confused her with yourself. Vernia is a work colleague and a very good friend who has given me a lot of support and help over the past months. She's getting married in a few weeks, and your eldest daughter will be one of her bridesmaids. Deborah is too little to understand what's going on, but she'll be dressed for the occasion, too. Gloria responded to this, and then added, well, who is this Ellie, and how well do you know her? Gloria, I know Ellie much better than I ever knew you. What's that supposed to mean? That I knew Ellie in the biblical sense of the word long before I slept with you for the first time. Now, good night, Gloria. I have things to do this evening. I answered, practically pushing her out the door. You told her everything, said Ingrid. Yes, I saw no reason not to do it. Sooner or later, one of Gloria's friends will put two and two together if she doesn't. No, I mean about Vernia. I don't understand why I shouldn't have told her about Vernia. Both Ingrid and Agda suddenly looked very embarrassed. What's happening? What did you two tell Gloria? I demanded. We didn't say anything. This is Pamela, Ingrid blurted out. What the hell could a 4-year-old girl tell Gloria? Not much, but when Gloria asked, well, she finally said that Vernia is your girlfriend. Oops, I grinned at the girls. And you haven't thought to correct this misunderstanding. Well, not quite, Ingrid grinned. My mother always hated it when my father went out with other women. We thought Gloria's dirty mind deserved to think whatever she wanted about the situation. Oh, I see. Now I understand you. But Pamela never mentioned that Tony sometimes sits with them when I take you two out. Brother of Vernia, Agda added with a smile. It was very mean of you. I couldn't have done better myself. Now Gloria is trying to figure out where Ellie fits into the equation. I wish I had told her that Vernia is getting married next month. Why? You didn't say who she's marrying, did you? Ingrid grinned. Of course, we could hint. She'll probably ask us. Don't you dare, my life is hard enough as it is. And besides, the poor woman is already frustrated trying to figure out who Ellie is. I wasn't in the office when Ellie called the next morning. I returned to find Vernia sitting at my desk, talking on the phone. We decided to share an office a few weeks ago because it was more convenient when I needed to leave early for something related to the kids or going to court. No, don't worry, I talked to the girls. They will pack everything the children need. They're very good, you know. Vernia said, waving her hand to pour her coffee from the coffee pot that we now kept in the office. Listen, Canella, I'm sure one of them would be happy to come over with Graham and watch the kids if you want to go out tonight. And if they can't for some reason, Tony and I can always babysit unless we have other plans. Vernia smiled at me as I placed her coffee on my table. Oh, he looks at me with evil eyes because I'm arranging his love life again. Ellie must have said something that made Vernia laugh. What did she say? I demanded when Vernia stopped laughing to catch her breath. We're talking about you, honey, not to you. She smiled at me, and then Ellie. Oh, I think our man is a little offended by me. I'd rather let him talk to you. Vernia handed me the phone. Hello, Ellie? Hey, Sparky, are you ready for tonight? It seems like everything was planned behind my back. Not on purpose, Graham. You sounded a little hesitant last night, so I invited Vernia and her boyfriend too. But apparently they are guarding Ingrid and Agda tonight, so they can't come. This is news to me, I answered. I'm sure you don't know half of what's going on, Graham. Anyway, I'll be waiting for you and the kids around 6:30, okay? Wait, Ellie. Our company has a management meeting every Friday evening. I'm not sure we can get there that early. You forgot that I know how the company works, Graham. Vernia will tell you that the meeting was rescheduled because my father suddenly had something very important to do that evening. You didn't ask him to reschedule the meeting just so I. The privilege of dining with the boss's daughter, Graham. But don't worry, Dad won't reveal why he rescheduled the meeting. He can be very reserved when he wants to be. And as you can guess, he approves of our communication. By the way, Mom too. I looked at Vernia and said, Am I being forced? No. I told you the other day, I just want us to be friends. Ellie responded quickly while Vernia shook her head furiously. Okay, I'll try to be there by 5:30, unless you tell me where you live. Vernia has an address and directions. See you tonight, Sparky. Graham, I said, but the line was already disconnected. However, before this happened, I heard obvious laughter. How long did you talk to Ellie before I came back? I demanded from Vernia. Long enough, and Ingrid called earlier to talk about last night. I learned that Ingrid had called to clarify plans for the evening when Agda and her boyfriend would go out on a date. I later learned that when my two nanas went out without their father surrogate, it was usually either Vernia or Tony, usually both together, who acted as remote chaperones. That is, the girls agreed to be in the same place where Vernia and Tony were that evening. They also followed the gentlemen's cars home, just in case. I also learned that most, if not all of the women my nannies tried to find for me had been secretly vetted by Vernia. I'm still being forced, I said when Vernia finished her explanation. Nothing like that, Graham. We're just trying to give you some kind of social life back. God, you only leave the house to work or to take the girls or kids out. And when I go out with you and Tony. Exactly. When you play the role of a third wheel, you need to go out and have your own life. Graham and Canella is perfect for you. You're both in the same situation. No one says or even expects you to fall head over heels in love with each other. We all think that. Well, under the circumstances, you both understand each other's situation better than most people. There was no doubt about it. I knew that all the women around me were manipulating me. Well, almost everything. Of course, there was Gloria, and I was damn sure she wasn't part of their plans. Our evening at Ellie's house was very pleasant and different from any I have spent recently. Most of it wasn't about Ellie and me, as I suspect many might think. It was about us and the kids, although the two little ones went to bed quite early. Ellie and I played games with the older two children until they went to bed much later than usual. Later, when all the kids were asleep, Ellie and I sat in her living room and talked about old times. We eventually came to a point in our relationship where we broke up, or rather, we stopped writing to each other. It turned out that several of Ellie's friends wrote to her regularly, and they convinced her that I was running after others. When specific names were mentioned, I realized that these friends were the ones who, to put it bluntly, were trying to court me at the time. This was the same couple who had given me the idea that Ellie was hanging out with me for fun before she left to study in Switzerland. The thought, "You were always a simpleton for the sake of a pretty face," crept into my mind again when I realized this fact. This may also be due to the relaxed morals of these two girls. But at that age, does it really matter? During adolescence, hormones tend to control logic, especially in young people. Do you understand what I am talking about? Surprisingly, probably because of the time that had passed since then, Ellie and I were able to laugh about it when we finally got around to specific names. She wasn't at all surprised that some of them had essentially betrayed her. It was a pleasant evening, and I immediately knew that we would definitely repeat it. Oh, and I should probably add, lest anyone get the wrong idea, that Ellie and I didn't get sentimental with each other. When we played board games with the kids, later after they had gone to bed, we sat across from each other on separate couches on opposite sides of a large coffee table. I think this coffee table was something like the Berlin Wall or Peace Line. We both talked at length about how my visit to her house that evening was aimed at rekindling an old friendship, rather than rekindling a romantic relationship. Not sure who started this part of the conversation. Not sure what time I went to bed that night, but it must have been about 2 or even 3 o'clock in the morning. I know I was dead asleep until Pamela came in and demanded that I join everyone for breakfast around 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. Stunned that the kids didn't wake me up sooner, as they usually did, especially since Ingrid and Agda weren't there to supervise them. I quickly showered, got dressed, and rushed downstairs, expecting to apologize to Ellie for leaving, getting all the kids up and dressed for her. However, when I burst into the kitchen, I discovered that Ellie was not coping alone. She, Ingrid, and Agda were sitting at Ellie's kitchen table drinking coffee. It was made quite clear to me that my two nannies did not trust me to handle raising my own children without their help. They persuaded Tony and Vernia to bring them there in the morning. I understood from the conversation that Vernia and Tony were staying the night at my house. They had done this many times in the past when they were babysitting Pamela and Deborah. They seemed to take babysitting with attractive young nannies just as seriously as babysitting, if you know what I mean. It seemed that while I slept, or rather their day was planned out. Although I vetoed the trip to London Zoo and suggested going to the larger zoo at Whipsnade, near Dunstable. Why I decided this way, I have no idea. Probably because he hadn't been there since he'd taken Ellie there in Bonnie's back seat all those years ago. 8 of us needed 2 cars. Ingrid, Pamela, Simone, and I went in mine, and the younger 2 children and Agda went with Ellie. Although Ingrid and Agda switched between cars several times during the day at the request of the children. Traveling to Whipsnade is no easy task. It's an extremely large area, and the kids, well, Pamela and Simone, the younger ones, really had little idea what was going on anyway, wanted to see every animal twice. Nothing could be missed when Pamela and Simone were around. It was already 7 o'clock in the evening when, after a quick visit to Ellie's house to pick up the children's things, we returned to my house. Pamela and Deborah fell asleep almost immediately. They must have been as tired as I was. Ingrid and Agda looked as fresh as daisies as they sat down in front of the TV. I lingered for a while, trying to pretend I wasn't tired, and then quietly went off to bed myself. It was almost lunchtime on a Tuesday morning when a sudden and unexpected rise in voices in the shared office distracted Vernia and I from our computer screens. Before Vernia could open the door to find out what was happening, She turned to me with a smile on her face. "It's Kynella," she smiled, and then disappeared, closing the door behind her and calling, "Hello, stranger." Vernia closing the door left me stranded. Should I follow her or wait for Ellie to come to my office? I didn't want to look. Well, too, you know what I mean. In any case, after pondering the question for a few minutes, I decided it was best to go there. Kynella was the boss's daughter after all, so I decided it was better to address her as Kynella in front of the employees. Going there turned out to be a mistake. Ellie moved slowly through the office as everyone seemed to want to greet her in person. I was almost in line until some of them noticed me and decided it was best to get back to work. Vernia poured coffee for the three of us as Ellie explained that she was just stopping by to drop off a purse that somehow Agda had left in her car on Saturday. I was surprised how Agda could forget such an important accessory, considering that it contained all her cosmetics. Ingrid and Agda were very careful about their appearance when leaving the house. It seemed strange to me that Agda did not mention that she was missing. But then I was sure that I knew Ingrid and Agda's plan, so it wasn't such a surprise to me. However, Ellie's appearance in the office happened. Vernia later suggested that this might have been the excuse Ellie needed to show her face back in the office. Ellie spent most of that morning in my office telling Vernia about the children's trip to Whipsnade, I think. I left them alone and continued working while they chatted. Anyway, since Vernia and I almost always had lunch together, when she invited Ellie to have lunch with her, it became a foregone conclusion that we would have lunch together. Well, I guess that was the basic plan when we left the office. However, almost nothing happens at Goldberg and Sons without Jack eventually finding out about it, especially when it comes to Ellie. As we walked out of the main entrance, Jack and his small entourage appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and the three of us were somehow invited to his dinner. We enjoyed a very long and expensive lunch at Jack's usual expensive restaurant, which, to my delight, he or the company must have paid for. Vernia, Ellie, and I didn't talk much in private. Jerry Hartwell came up to me on the way back to the office and told me how happy everyone was that Ellie was showing her face in the office again. Apparently, I was given credit for this. He continued to say something, but to be honest, I hardly listened because I heard Vernia say to Ellie, "Oh, of course he doesn't mind. He told me yesterday how much the girls enjoyed playing with your two over the weekend. Just bring them when it gets too much. Ingrid and Agda won't mind either, I can assure you of that." Ellie left the group in the company car park, saying something about needing to pick up her children. I didn't quite catch where it came from. I assumed it was from the nanny. Tell me, Vernia, who wouldn't mind if Ellie brought her girls to his house to play with his kids? I asked her when we were alone in our office. You, of course. Why me? Oh, don't be stupid, Graham. It's your fault anyway that Simone can't play with her best friend anymore. My fault? How is that? Well, let's see how Kynella tells it. Ellie, you mean why do you insist on calling her Kynella? Sparky, there is only one person in this world who allows or dares to call Kynella Ellie. Have you noticed that? I can't say I noticed. Trust me. Anyway, the way she tells the story, you and she were talking about old times on Friday night. Hey, what did she tell you? Nothing more than you told me a long time ago, so don't worry. Oh God, I really told you, didn't I? Yeah, I guess it's called talking too much. It's not your usual trait. Anyway, Kynella hinted that some of her friends gave you the idea that she was leading you by the nose back then. Yeah, we kind of figured that out the other day. And then, or at least one of them, took advantage of the situation that this story created. Yeah, well, I went out with a couple of Ellie's friends after she moved away. Well, the story about you being led by the nose was a complete lie, and it turned out that one of those women who gave you that nonsense is the mother of Simone's best friend. By the way, she was also one of Kynella's closest friends before the past Friday night, or rather Sunday morning, when Kynella rebuffed her. Oh, or should I say, oh, what a tangled web we weave when we start lying. Oh my God, you're quoting Sir Walter Scott. quietly studying the classics, huh? No, not really. Mary Williams, my old teacher, gave me a book of useful quotes when I left school. I studied it for several weeks. Mary said it would make me sound smart even if I didn't look like one. Back in those days, I was all leather jackets and long hair. Anyway, I think this is the first time I found an opportunity to use one of the quotes. Mary Williams, I remember her. A nice old lady who used to come to my dad's cocktail parties with Bill Gillard. She? Yes, all the time. I think she and Bill were quiet lovers. Or at least they were once. I wonder why they never got married. I don't know, but that explains a lot about why I got the job in the accounting office. I wasn't what you might call a natural candidate for an office job back then. More like a construction job. Mary Williams encouraged me to apply for a job with Bill, and he set me on the path to further education. And you didn't know they slept with each other? Vernia, not a single child in that school would have believed that anyone would even dare, let alone sleep with Mary Williams. She was very kind to me, but God, she could be a dragon when she wanted. What about Kynella? Do you still have the courage to sleep with her? What? Well, I'm sure that's what she wants, Graham. Vernia, Ellie, and I had something good once, but that was a long time ago. I work for her father now, and the last thing I need is to ruin everything, if you know what I mean. If Ellie wants to be friends, I'm more than happy to be friends with her, but I really don't see it going any further. Oh, fine, whatever you say. But trust me, Canella will get her way, and you'll end up in bed with her eventually. In the following months, Ellie did bring her children to my house, so they could play with mine, but mostly while I was at work, although often they were still home when I returned. Sometimes during school holidays and such, she would come during the day to pick up Ingrid, Agda, and my girls, and take them all or to her house so the kids could be together. In the end, I even bought a minivan to accommodate everyone. Ellie never mentioned Tanya or why she had a fight with her, and does not encourage Simone's friendship with her daughter, although sometimes I heard Simone mention Pamela's baby. Finally, one day I decided that I needed to say something about this to Ellie, so I caught her in the kitchen as soon as the opportunity arose. Listen, Ellie, what do you think about parents who don't let their children make friends like ours did? I know what you mean, Graham, but this is a little different. Our parents didn't approve of us talking. We communicated, and not only, Ellie smiled, but what Tanya did to me, to us, is completely different. Whether you understand it or not, she separated us. And why? To find out how good you are in the back seat of the car. Damn, did you tell her about? You're not kidding. God, Graham, honestly, I've never had as much fun as I did back at the reservoir in the back of that Viva. Hell, I've never had anything like it since. And that includes my wedding night. Tanya stole this from me, and it looks like I'll never be able to get it back. Are you blaming me for not wanting this woman around? I'm sorry that Simone is suffering, but I can imagine one day doing, there's something bad about this, Tanya. Oh, so smug. Yes, you should have seen the look on her face when I told you that you work for my father. Two-faced bitch. And when you told me that she lied to you, that you were chasing someone else, and that you slept with her. I never said that. You didn't need to tell, Graham. It was implied by the fact that you dated Tanya for a while. God, I was so naive, telling the girls how good you were at. Well, you get the idea. Am I like this? Why has no one ever told me this before? Well, they did, but I thought it was an exaggeration. It's all the nonsense that people say during sex, you know. Is that all it meant to you, a short affair? Ellie sounded upset. Hey, wait, don't get me wrong. I was in love with you, and we didn't have a short fling. I agree that sex in your little Viva's backside wasn't the most comfortable thing in the world. But I made love to you because, well, because I was in love with you at the time. Now, when it comes to Tanya and that company, well, with them, yes, it can be called a short affair if you understand me. God, you have to remember, I was a young man and went without this for almost 8 months. 8 months? Have you been waiting for me for 8 months? Well, to be honest, it was only 4 months after your last letter before I finally got the hint. Damn, I'll kill this Tanya and the others. They convinced me that you were sleeping with some girl less than 2 weeks after I left. I kind of figured it out from your letters, and if you remember, I denied it. Yes, you denied it, and I was a fool for believing my so-called friends over you, or the two hypocritical little bitches I thought were my friends. But there's no point in crying over spilled milk after all this time. Sorry, what's that supposed to mean? You stopped loving me a long time ago, didn't you? There's no point in me pining over you now, so I won't. I'm happy that you're noble enough to be my friend. Ellie, you're manipulating this conversation, aren't you? I don't know what you're talking about, Graham. You know, I highly suspect that at this moment I should have said that I would like to be much more than a friend to you. You had to? Well, isn't it? It depends on whether you've thought about it. What? That you'd like to spend a couple of hours at the reservoir with me again. I'm confused, Ellie. Where is this conversation going? To the bedroom, I hope. Now, which one is yours or mine? None. I work for your father, remember. And do you really think he would dare interfere in my personal life again, Graham, after what happened with Ronald? Why not? Ronald was the perfect husband for me according to Dad, Graham. In the old days, Sparky was my parents' nightmare. They both admitted to me that they saw the error in their actions. I don't think he will interfere with what happens between us in the future. Now we can keep things informal or make things formal. But whatever happens, how about you and I try out the back seat of one of our cars in the near future? I get turned on every time I see you. No, we didn't do it that night. But Ellie's children stayed with me for the weekend with Ingrid and Agda looking after them. And Ellie and I went for a romantic dinner at a restaurant, after which we went to one of the best hotels in our area. Ah, you ask, why a hotel? Why not go back to Ellie's house? Well, you see, to be honest, or maybe I should say we needed to buy a couple of new beds before something like this could happen. I couldn't go to bed with Ellie in the same marriage bed I shared with Gloria. It just didn't feel right. And we had the same problem at Ellie's house with Ronald. So our first experience together again required a large bed in the hotel's wedding suite. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, I think. I can't explain what it meant to take Ellie to dinner, or how difficult it was to get her out of the car at the restaurant. Then it got really funny because Ellie insisted that we check into the hotel as Mr. T and Mrs. Smith. What's funny about this, you ask? Well, the front desk clerk greeted Ellie with, "Good evening, Miss Goldberg," when she signed the register as G. Smith. I wanted to have a drink at the bar, but Ellie was in a hurry to get to our room, or the bridal suite. To be honest, she almost took my pants off in the elevator when the older couple walked in and glared at us before exiting the elevator again. We giggled like schoolchildren all the way to our room, where Ellie insisted that I carry her over the threshold. By that time, I was already succumbing to her whims. I'm not going to describe what happened in that room that night. A gentleman doesn't discuss such things. Well, not in public anyway. Suffice to say, Ellie stood by me and suggested that I spend less time at my desk and more time working out. What with work and children, I can't find time to go to the gym, I complained. Who the hell was talking about the gym? I'm willing to give you a good workout every night of the week for free, she smiled at me. Oh my, you little devil, you did it, didn't you? There was Vernia's greeting when I walked into our office Monday morning. Damn, what did I do? Grow horns over the weekend? No, you no longer have the look of an abandoned man. She smiled at me. Mind you, I might not have noticed this if Tony and I hadn't popped into the house on Saturday night and found the girls putting all 4 kids to bed. It was funny when we asked when you planned to come home. Simone said that Mom and Dad need time alone, so they probably won't be back until Sunday lunch at the earliest. Damn, she's only 5 years old. Oh, come on, she won't know what you two actually did. What says a lot more is that she called you Daddy. Oh, both Ellies do. They got it from Pamela and Deborah, who also started calling Ellie Mom a few weeks ago. Well, you're going to be their legal stepfather, I mean. Look, don't get ahead of yourself, Vernia. I'm not sure what the future holds. There are a lot of things to consider. Ingrid and Agda, for example, the kids are very attached to them, as they do to children and to your supposed stepchildren too. All you need to do is look at the big picture. What's the big picture? Canella is trying to raise 4 small children every morning. If that doesn't require a nanny or 2 in the house, I don't know what does. And boy, is Canella's huge mansion full of spare rooms. You planned everything for us, didn't you, Vernia? Not really, but it seems like a logical progression to me. You two are dating again after many years. You're both left in very similar situations, raising kids on your own, and more importantly, you're crazy about each other. Plus, you're extremely compatible in bed. What makes you think that? It could have been a disaster on Saturday night. What do you know? Graham, you were expected to return on Sunday morning. You and Canella didn't actually show up at home until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Who told you this? Ingrid, she was worried and doesn't have the same confidence in your seduction abilities that I do. The poor girl has been nervous for weeks. Anyway, I know Saturday night wasn't a failure. I highly suspect that this will become a regular thing until you two stop fooling around, move in together, or get married. I believe that I could ask Vernia not to interfere in my personal affairs, and if I did, I knew in advance that it would be a futile effort. The kids and I are at Canella's house. Can you pick us up today? Ingrid asked when she called me just after lunch. Sure, the kids are having fun. Hey, wait a minute, isn't Pamela supposed to be in kindergarten today? She was, but not in a regular daycare, Graham. We thought it would be a good idea to see how she would react to going to school here. She likes it because Simone is with her. Are we getting ahead of ourselves, Ingrid? You think so, but I don't. Graham, there just aren't enough bedrooms in your house. We thought it would be smart to see how Pamela and Deborah would react to changing schools. Deborah likes the daycare here too. Well, we can say that that's all. Game, set, and match. My extended family moved into Canella's house in a matter of days. And yes, we had to buy a new double bed pretty quickly. Where exactly Canella rented the vintage Vauxhall Viva, I have no idea. But we did go to the lake one night, just for old time's sake. It was an interesting night, but I felt the effects for days afterwards. The second time we tried it was in Jack Goldberg's limousine. Much more space and a much more memorable experience for both of us. I still wonder if the old man ever realized why Canella borrowed his beloved car that night and what we did to it. A year or so later, I became the company's CFO, and then a few years later, Jack Goldberg retired, and I jumped straight into the chairman's chair. Ingrid and Agda. Well, Ingrid still lives with us as a kind of. That's a good question. Foster sister guest, I guess you could say that. Agda married a nice young guy from our office. You could say she kidnapped the poor guy. He didn't stand a chance when Agda targeted him. They seem happy, and apparently he now speaks Swedish like a native. Vernia and Tony are married, and she claims that she really enjoys her high-profile job as CFO. She is assisted on a part-time basis by one Canella Sparks, but I'm not entirely sure that the time they spend together has anything to do with the company's affairs. Tony and I both believe that the two important women in our lives spend most of their time buying expensive things and attending fashion shows. I spend most of my time sitting in my seat in the office upstairs, ordering the servants around. In fact, I'm having a great time getting older. Life goes on. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.